nice solar gardens in Kiambu County in the Republic of Kenya. Today we talk about colonization and ask ourselves the question, has it died? Or it is alive in different ways? And in order to answer that question, I always must refer to this book by Nkrumah, Neo-Colonialism, the Last Stage of Imperialism. And what I gather from that book is that classical colonialism may have ended, but as some have said figuratively, that African countries received the crown, but the jewels were retained by the colonizers. So that it is true to say that many African countries, all African countries, now by dint of decolonization have a flag, they have national anthems, they have national mottos, they control, or so they think, they control their politics, they have their presidents and their prime ministers, they have their ministers, they appear to control their budgets through their parliaments. But the truth is different from the perspective of many, that the colonizer simply chained tucked, and they chained tucked in such a subtle way that in many ways they continue to control their former colonies in very interesting ways.
Don't let us also forget that colonialism and imperialism may come to us yet in a different guise, not necessarily from Europe. We must alert ourselves to be able to recognize this.
Please make sure you share this video out
and prepare ourselves to fight against it.
And they started. In January 1961, they assassinated Patrice Emery Lumumba, and Congo has never been the same again. In 1963, they assassinated Sylvanus Olympio in Togo, and Togo has never been the same again. Then there were coup d'etats, Kwame Nkrumah himself. In 1966, eliminated via coup d'etat, all his writings, all his speeches banned, never to be read, never to be listened to until 1972, when Ignatius Kutu Acheampong rehabilitated him. Ahmed Ben Bella in Algeria gone. In Nigeria, Nnamdi Azikiwe and Abubakar Tafawa Balewa gone. In Mali, Modibo Keita gone. In Chad, everywhere, coup d'etat. Here in Ethiopia, 1974, if I'm not wrong, coup d'etat and the emergence of the Deg regime. In East Africa, Uganda, coup d'etat, mutinies in Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania in 1971. All orchestrated because we were disunited and we were weak. The predictions of our forefathers and founding mothers that disunited we would remain. No. We must have one army. We must have one currency. We must have one foreign policy. We must be united. And I can hear the Osagiefo saying, I do not want to be the leader of that country. I simply want unity. And I'm saying that we must live here with one united government. They listen not to the Osagiefo. I can still hear those immortal words of the Osagiefo Kwame Nkrumah telling his Ghanaian peoples that the independence of Ghana means nothing if the rest of Africa is not independent. I can hear the Osagie for Kwame
People, welcome to Why Eating Show. My name is John, and today has been another day. We are going to dive into the details of what is happening right now in the world. And as a matter of fact, Professor Lumumba has come out to send a strong message to the leaders of ECOWAS. And before we go and watch this video, please don't forget to subscribe to this channel if today be your first time, and also share this video to million people. To create awareness for them to know what is happening in our mix. Back in the days in 18th centuries, that media wasn't aware to create awareness for us to know what is happening right now. So it happens to be that our great leaders were being assassinated, as it happened to Thomas Sankara, as it happened to Libya President Gaddafi, and also Professor Lumumba. A lot of people were being assassinated because our voices were not out. As today we have the platform to speak the truth to the public, to know that these media are sending false accusation, false information. This time around, thank God you have met the right channel, which will break down all the details. Okay, enough is enough. You are the, because how would I explain to my children and speak against this abomination that this man is out from his bed? You are coming to arrest Ibrahim Traore for what? Who has arrested Obama after he Gaddafi? Who has arrested US after you people creating a lot of damages in this world? Who have arrested you people? If you are coming to arrest somebody who is protecting his people, taking care of his people, somebody who is providing for his people, you are coming to arrest him.
And let us just look at some of the countries and how it is that even when we talk about the end of colonization, you still see vestiges of it in what can be described as the neo-colonial project. Let us start with the most notorious of them, France. When France wanted to live as a colonizer, one of the things that they did was to cause a vote to be cast by the colonized peoples. That was during the presidency of Charles de Gaulle in 1958. And many of their colonies were asked to vote either yes or no, whether they wanted France to be retained. Many of them, of course, voted yes. But in Mali, under Ahmed Sékou Touré, they voted no. The same was the case in Algeria, where Ahmed Ben Bella was very clear. And when they were leaving at that time, the French destroyed almost everything in Mali, in Bamako. The same they did in Algeria, and many people were killed. And then they entered into a pact with their former colonizers, which some have described as the pact for the continuation of colonization. And that pact required, among other things, that France would continue to control the resources of their colonies. France would continue to ensure that a good part of their natural resources were kept in their banks. France would ensure that they would print their currencies, and in many ways France was still in control. And of course, they created an organization called La Francophonie, where the former colonized peoples are members, and France is the one that controls. And that tells you that this was as a subterfuge, a very subterranean and perhaps not so subtle way of ensuring that France still remained in control. Look at the British on their part. Long time before the process of decolonization started in Africa, they had created what they described as the Commonwealth of Independent Nations. And many countries, after they regained their independence, including African countries, became members of the Commonwealth, which is headquartered in London and whose titular head is the British monarch. If you want then to understand how the whole thing operates, you will see that amongst the Commonwealth nations, even certain things are dictated to the Commonwealth countries by the British, even if they don't say so. For example, when we talk about ambassadors, when you are members of the Commonwealth, you don't call them ambassadors, you call them high commissioners. And this in itself tells you how, in a very subtle way, perhaps I'm using the word subtle wrongly, it is very obvious that the very reason why the Commonwealth of Independent Nations was created is because you still want to control. Does it not appear strange to you that the United States of America, which was a former colony of the British, is not a member of the Commonwealth because it has power outside of it? But African countries and a few Asian countries, but I'm focusing on Africa, are members of the Commonwealth. This is a continuation of colonization through the neo-colonial project. In addition to that, if you look at the Belgians, it is the same thing. Of course, they had only their colony which they retained in the Democratic Republic of Congo, but you will see that at critical moments, many Belgian, the Congolese leaders look to Belgium as the true political north. So there is the continuation of colonization once again in a very subtle way. The Portuguese also ensure that that happens, and you will discover that when you visit countries such as Angola, perhaps only after the death of Neto or Mozambique, and Cape Verde and Guinea-Bissau, you still see that there is some allegiance to their former colonizers, and that is why, in a manner that is ironical, when the European scholars and historians are talking about Africa, they say that Africa is divided into francophone countries, which are the French-speaking countries. But if you go to those countries, perhaps it's only a very small population of who are the elite who speak French. We talk about the Anglophone countries. These are English-speaking countries, and we know that even in countries such as Cameroon, where there is a conflict, they want to depict the conflict as between the Anglophones and the Francophones. This in itself is a statement of the not only cultural and linguistic colonization, but even the economies continue to be controlled in that regard. Then we talk about the Lusophones, the Portuguese-speaking countries. But if you go to Angola, you go to Mozambique or Guinea-Bissau, once again, it is only a very small elite who actually speak Portuguese. One can therefore see a trend where the classical, neo-classical colonization may have ended, but we have colonization is what we call neo-colonization. And many have spoken about it. And there are scholars now that talk about two terms, two English words that they use. That there was the process of decolonization. That process of decolonization entailed the actual removal of instruments and institutions of governance by the colonizers, which then saw countries becoming independent as sovereign states in the West as Westphalian states and in the classical sense as members of the United Nations. But there are now those who are saying that there is something called decoloniality, that under decoloniality something else must happen, that African countries must liberate themselves totally from the colonial project, and that this liberation requires, among other things, that economically you are liberated, that politically you are liberated, that culturally you are liberated, and it is only when you do that that you can talk about the total death of the colonial project. Kenya's famous author Ngugi wa Thiong'o has written a book called Decolonization of the Mind. And in that book, which is targeting the whole idea of the literature that we consume, the languages that we use, and our very worldview, is saying that until and unless we decolonize our minds, then the colonial project will continue, because the infrastructure and the structure of the colonial project is alive and well. And this is what brings me to a book that is written by a good friend of mine, Nana Kobina Nketia, which is Culture in Governance, the Ghanaian Paradigm. And in that book, Nana Kobina Nketia, himself a traditional ruler in Ghana and a former lecturer in political science, says that systems which are drawn from their own experiences, and until the day that they are capable of articulating their world vision in a manner that is informed by their culture as sensitive to the realities of the moment, the colonial project will always be alive. And in supporting that argument, he makes reference to a number of people, one of whom is John Henry Clark, the American who has written about the colonial project and who himself was involved in the civil rights movement. And he quotes from John Henry Clark, and I paraphrase. Clark says, if you look at your typical post-colonial African state, depending on who governed them, their systems of governance are drawn from their colonizers. So that until very recently, former British colonies would talk about the Westminster model of governance, which means that they are drawing their governance culture from the British. And then he says that when you look at the former French colonies, until very recently, borrowed from the 1958 Gaullist constitution. And in his view, therefore, he says that as long as this is the approach that is undertaken by these countries, none of them will ever succeed. Of course, we can now begin to see the emergence of a new crop of leaders who are beginning to question these systems, and they are saying that we were able to witness classical colonization. We have lived through a period which can be described as colonization in camouflage, which is the neo-colonial project. And we have seen that during the neo-colonial project, we have had leaders who are themselves mere marionettes and puppets controlled from outside. The time is now to put our foot down. The time is now to shake up the bottle and to ensure that we brew systems of governance, which systems of governance are going to be Afrocentric, but Afrocentricity not for its own sake, but in order to ensure that those governance systems are understood by the people, they are attuned in a manner that is going to be beneficial to the people economically, politically, socially, culturally, and spiritually. This is what we hear being done and we see beginning to happen, and it will be resisted, but it is true that we move from colonization, classical sense, to neo-colonization, and the struggle is to exorcise the ghost of neo-colonization. Thank you very much. We are here at Nice Solar Garden in Kiambu County.